In this lesson, we'll continue our discussion of our search UI by building out the Browse Album scene. So I'll add another scene based on a UI table view controller. And let me set its class type to Browse Albums View Controller. So select the Trivium cell and Control drag to Browse Albums. And I want to make this a push segue. Let's highlight the segue. And let me give this an identifier of Browse Albums. So I'll select the view controller, and let me give it a top bar of a navigation bar. And I'll give this the title Albums. Select its cell, and I want to change this to a basic type as well. I'll give it the title In Waves. And let me give it a reuse identifier of album cell. Just like we had on our search UI, I also want to have a close button on this UI as well. So we'll drag and drop one of those on, add a flexible space item. I'll call that close. If we want to dismiss the search UI from this screen, we can do that as well. Let me control drag to our Browse Albums view controller. Select its close dialog method. Let's run the app again. Click search. Enter in some text. Tap the search button. This gives me a result. I'll click that and we'll go to our albums list. So that all looks good. Let me just make sure the close button's working as well. Looks good. Now when the user clicks the album cell, we're going to want to transition to our details view controller. So let's hook up that functionality. Let me zoom out a little bit. I'm going to want to create a segue from this cell to the album details view controller. So I'll zoom in on this a little bit. See if I can fit all of this on the screen at the same time. I have to drag this up a little bit for the time being. And I'll control drag onto my album details. And I will make this a push transition as well. I'll zoom out a little bit. Let me select that segue. And I will give this an identifier of show details. All right, let's look at the Browse Albums view controller. So we have one public property, the artist. So that's the artist that was selected in our search list. We have our close dialog method. Just like I'm doing in our other table views, I've got an NSMutable array that I'm defining in the class extension. Synthesizing our properties. Now in this viewDidLoad method, I am going to set the navigation bar to not hidden, because I do want that to be there. I'm just creating some sample data to render in our list, so we'll delete that in a future lesson. And then initializing the albums array with the sample data. I have a close dialog, and then my standard table view data source methods. Now let's first look at the search artist's prepare for segue. So in its prepare for segue, I'm determining, is this the Browse Album segue? If it is, then let's get a reference to our Browse Albums view controller. Find out which row the user selected, and then grab the appropriate artist and set that on the view controller. So this will transition over to the Browse Albums view controller then. And in here I'm doing something very similar, but I'm saying if the segue is equal to show details, then get a reference to the album details view controller, which is the destination. Find out the selected index path, grab the appropriate album, and then I additionally want to set its Save to List enabled property to yes. This will allow that Save button to be enabled when we navigate to this UI. Let's actually navigate over to that method right now. So in the Album Details view controller, currently we're doing nothing. We will end up saving this ultimately, but for now let's just dismiss this view controller. So I'll say dismiss view controller animated, yes, and pass in null for the completion. All right, so let's run it and see how everything looks. Enter in my search term. Click on the album. And we can see we have our album details. Oh, but we can see we have a couple problems here. Let's modify one thing about the bar at the bottom. I'll go to my storyboard and select the details for the album view controller. One of the things that we can set on the view controller itself is whether or not it hides the bottom bar when it gets pushed onto the stack. So all I need to do is simply select that. For some reason I see that our album image view seems to have gotten squished a little bit, so let me fix that as well. Run it again. Enter in my search term. Select the album. Well, our album image still looks a little messed up. I'll have to figure out what the problem is with that. But at the bottom, we can see that our toolbar is no longer present, and we can see our buttons. So tapping the button should take us back to the main UI. And it does, so that looks good. Our search UI is now complete, and with it we're able to navigate all of the scenes in our app. So we've covered a lot of ground in this chapter's lessons. We've converted our existing nib-based project over to use storyboards, added new scenes to display the album details, and created a prototype of our search UI. Along the way, we've seen how to use scenes and segues and pass data between various scenes in our app. You should now have a good understanding of the very cool new storyboarding features